Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Phil Mackintosh, chief economist at Nasdaq, to discuss what's going on with the real economy and what sectors are seeing growth. Phil, the manufacturing sector in the US and Europe are responding in different ways. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, in reality, if we're looking at the PMI indexes, the ISM indexes, all measures of manufacturing sector growth prospects, they've been pretty good in the States. And it's one of the reasons why people keep saying that the economy is actually going pretty well. But when you actually look at what those indexes are doing in Europe, you can see that they've actually taken a much bigger hit than here, especially with the second wave of COVID. So it's kind of interesting that in the US, we just keep seeing such a strong manufacturing sector, but in Europe, it's not quite the same story. And the lockdowns that they've done for their second wave of coronavirus have definitely had a bigger impact than here.
And as has been the case throughout the pandemic, services and small businesses have been the hardest hit. Are there any signs of improvement there?
Not really, unfortunately. I mean, you can definitely see the sort of K-shaped recovery. If you look at any of the data points, online seems to be beating bricks and mortar. Today, we take a look at the data coming out of restaurants, and people are definitely eating takeaway a lot more, but they're still not going out to casual dining or restaurants where they have to sit down at any rate like they used to. And that's just sort of endemic of a lot of the data you're seeing on small businesses, which obviously the services sector, lots of small businesses in travel and in restaurants and that kind of space, in retail, are really not recovering at all. They've taken a big hit and they're not getting better yet. So you can see the bifurcation of the economy. The goods sector is doing really well, and still a lot of the bricks and mortar, a lot of the small businesses are doing pretty badly.
Is that reflected in retail spending?
So it's kind of interesting because we keep talking about the fact that spending has actually recovered back above pre-coronavirus levels, but we know that that's mostly true again in the goods sector, not in the services sector. But we've been seeing, as COVID has dragged on, that bounce back in spending has been falling. People have been eating into their savings. And actually, the last data point shows that personal spending is starting to fall again. So all of the lockdowns and all of the rejuvenation of coronavirus cases does seem to have put a bit of a cap on retail spending. And that's expected to potentially harm January unemployment data, which we're expecting to see soon too.
Finally, let's review the data on some of the most actively traded stocks. It appears that fundamentals still do matter in this environment.
Yeah, but obviously a lot of people on the TV are talking about GameStop, and it's just important to put things in perspective. I mean, if we look at GameStop's fundamentals, we've said a bunch of times, like the performance of the stock market is driven by a lot of factors that are fundamental, especially earnings and earnings forecasts and earnings over the long term. If you look at GameStop, it's the reason it was such a low stock price is because it's actually had declining revenues, and it's had quite a lot of quarters recently of negative profits. So the huge run up in the price that it's seen isn't really reflected in the earnings that it's had historically. But what is interesting is if you look at some of the mentions on the Reddit subreddit, clearly there's been a shift away from more diversified things like SPY, which is the S&P 500 ETF, into very stock discussions and an explosion of traffic in just a couple of tickers. So that, I think, helps us understand the dynamics that have been at play the last week or so.
All right, Phil, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.